some friends here, Rebecca and Courtney, thank you. So, again, hello and welcome everyone. We are thrilled that so many women have joined us for this first in a series of webinars by MNWiC for women interested in conservation and climate smart practices and caring for the land and community. I want to take a few minutes to introduce you to MNWiC. Our mission is to engage women in conservation, connecting you with tools and resources needed to help you figure out your own goals in relation to conservation practices. I'm going to share my screen right now and introduce you to our wonderful initiative. So, Minnesota Women in Conservation is supported by NRCS and hosted by Renewing the Countryside, a nonprofit in Minnesota for over 20 years. Let me just move this forward. So across the state of Minnesota, women producers are managing over 9 million acres of farmland, and female farmers listing their primary occupation as farming has increased substantially. In 2022, it reached almost 12,000. Our objectives are to increase women's knowledge and understanding and use of conservation and NRCS programs, to shepherd women through the process of program assistance, and to build a lasting legacy of relationships and regional networks. Just at a glance, you can see here the depth of female farming involved in every type of farming, from grains to dairy to poultry and sheep and other sorts of animals, and not to forget flowers and pigment producers. We have 4 regional coordinators. Allison Ryan represents our North Central region, and 2 of the counties she's covering, you can see the number of female producers there, the number of acres, and the number of farms. We have Alex Kaminsky with us today from Upper Minnesota Valley region, West Central, covering Lockeparl, Chippewa, and Swift counties. And Noreen Thomas is with us today, our regional coordinator from Northwest, covering Clay, Norman, and Wilkin counties. And Maddie Barch, they're with us today from the Southeast region, covering Goodhue County, where I live, Rice, and Dakota counties, with a substantial number of female farmers and farms. So please join us for our Welcoming Wednesday webinars. Will be the 4th Wednesday of every month. You can follow us on MNWiC's Instagram and Facebook, and there's the QR code. And now I'm going to stop sharing and come back and open up our presentation for our first speaker, who is Claudia Ciganik with NRCS. Claudia is a soil conservationist who has been with NRCS for 2.5 years. Last fall, she moved up to Duluth, and she is now serving the Arrowhead region. She previously worked with Glencoe office, serving McLeod County. She is passionate about better serving operations of all types and sizes. Before joining NRCS, Claudia worked with community gardens and urban ag around the Twin Cities. She is currently a container vegetable grower, and she looks forward to having a garden of her own someday. Claudia, thank you for joining us. She is eager to share her knowledge of NRCS technical assistance while continuing to learn from every operation that she works with. Take it away, Claudia.
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, Burke, and the rest of MNWiC for taking the time to put this presentation or webinar together, I should say. I am super excited to be here and talk about who NRCS is, what we do, and how conservation planning may benefit your operation. So the Natural Resources Conservation Service is an agency underneath the United States Department of Agriculture that works with landowners on identifying and addressing conservation concerns. We work with a variety of different landowners and operations to provide conservation technical assistance. whether that is someone giving us a quick call, wondering about an invasive species on there. Oop, we're moving too fast. Whether someone gives us a quick call, we provide 15-minute 15-minute conversation on the phone of technical assistance. And that's it. That's the end of the technical assistance. Or we're doing more of an in-depth dive in your operation, inviting us out to the field, doing a site visit with you, thinking about what types of practices might work on your operation, and creating a conservation plan ultimately. And we are a national agency, but I do like to remind people that we are local as well. Field offices are located throughout the state, and normally this is by county. Sometimes counties share an office, but there is a local face there for you to get to know and to come out to your property and work with you on conservation. Next slide. And how can we help you? We can help you identify conservation concerns on your operation. Once we have identified resource concerns, we can suggest different sorts of practices that you can integrate on your operation. We can go as far as creating a conservation plan, a more detailed document going over practices, practice standards, your timeline. And then we can also provide cost assistance in most situations to help you implement those practices. Next slide. And so our assistance is based on the idea of helping people help the land. And we do this by helping people address resource concerns on their operation. And our agency recognizes 47 different resource concerns. It's a lot. And so I've summed up a couple in the categories of soil, water, air, plants, animals, and energy. Most of our soil resource concerns have to do with soil health, and erosion is a big one. The water category is really diverse. In Minnesota, these are some common ones. Some inefficient irrigation water use is a big one, and nutrients transported to surface water or groundwater. Air is not an overly common category, but I included it. Emissions of particulate matter and PM precursors. This could look something like a concern of drift on your farmstead or operation. Next slide. Plants is also a pretty diverse category. Plant productivity and health. This kind of looks at how can we improve how your plants are growing on your operation, whether that's better nutrient management or extending the growing season. Wildfire hazard isn't a huge one throughout the state, but me up in the Northeast, that is a big one up here. Animals is, we can look both at wildlife in this category and livestock. Both are included in this category of resource concerns. And energy. This one also isn't too common, though we have started to use it a little bit in Minnesota. Like improving efficiency of your equipment, whether that's in the field or on your farmstead. So there are a bunch more that are not included in this presentation. And honestly, it could be a whole presentation in itself. If you are interested, this is there are fact sheets available online for people to look at. Yeah, next slide. And this is a visual example of kind of what I was explaining, how our assistance works. So before you can see the resource concerns, what we call it, is erosion happening on this field. And we would come in and work with you on thinking about potential solutions for this. So one practice that we could implement is a water and sediment control basin. That's going to be that picture on the top, a grass waterway, a cover crop. There are even other ones that are not included on this slide, and you could use multiple to address this erosion issue. But that's how our assistance works, is the practices that we are suggesting comes back to addressing a resource concern or environmental concern on your operation. Next slide. And like resource concerns, there are a ton of different practices we offer. I'm not going to go into details on all of them because that also could be a whole nother presentation. But with this slide, I wanted to show that we can work with a bunch of different operations, and we work over a bunch of different land use types, including cropland, forest land, pasture, and farmstead. I wasn't sure who all was joining this call and what type of operations you have, but it just shows that NRCS can work with, all operations. Next slide. And so at this point, we've done the groundwork. We've inventoried your resource concerns, talked to you about potential solutions and your operations goals. And so the next step would be creating a conservation plan. This is a document that outlines what conservation practices and systems that you plan to implement on your operation to improve this overall sustainability. And they can vary a little bit, but what is usually included is an aerial photo or map of your farm, a map and description of the soils of your farm, job sheets and fact sheets for the conservation practices you're planning on implementing, location and schedule for the areas you're applying the conservation practices, and if applicable, it may include some engineering designs and a plan as well. Next slide. Uh-oh, the full conservation plan is not showing up on this slide, but this is a portion of it. So you would get a full map that details, I guess this is a big portion of it, where you are going to be implementing the practices. In this case, we are implementing cover crop on cropland. We are going to be implementing, I believe it was a grazing plan on this pasture land. On field 2 of the cropland, we are going to be implementing a high tunnel. And then on the on the forest land, we are doing a forest stand improvement. Those are all different practices we offer that are going to be addressing different resource concerns. And on my map that unfortunately is not showing up right now, there's also a table that I like to include on all of them that just upon first glance, you're able to look at what types of practices you're doing, what amounts, and then just the general timeline. Are you completing it in 2026? Are you completing it in 2027? Those types of things. So it's a quick resource for producers and landowners to look at and understand, what their plan is. Next slide. No, my conservation plan is gone too. That's okay. Again, we have a quick zoom in of what basically is in your conservation plan. This is the document that details the land use. So this person is working on forest, and then they're going to be doing forest stand improvement. And then our practice code is what those numbers are. And they're also going to be doing a woody residue treatment. There's a short description of what the practices are listed underneath the practice name. And then the table outlines where and when you're expected to complete the practices by. So you can read this as this person is going to be doing on field 1, 4 acres of forest stand improvement and woody residue treatment by March of 2026. And then the next year, they're planning on doing 6.3 acres on field 1 of forest stand improvement and woody residue treatment by March of 2027. So in total, they're going to be doing 10.3 acres in these areas. Next slide. And then all of our conservation plans should include a implementation requirement sheet. Otherwise, we call them job sheets. And these vary quite a bit depending on your practice that you're implementing. But it is site-specific information and instructions necessary to install or implement a conservation practices. Depending on what you're doing, what's all included in that can look different. For a practice like the one I have on the screen, a wildlife habitat planting or something like a cover crop, there will be a seed plan included with that, detailing what you should plant, the rate, methods, etc. There will also be material quantities. The practice that comes to mind is something like a fence, where are we using wood? Are we using steel? Are we using, those types of materials? That will be in your implementation requirement sheet. Under methods, sometimes there's more than one method to achieve conservation. And a good example would be with cover crop again, or wildlife habitat plantings. There you can seed a field using aerial methods, using broadcast, using drilling. That'll all be spelled out in the implementation requirement sheet under methods. Operation and maintenance is going to be for like the long-term maintenance of your plan. A practice that this can be related to is something like a shelter belt or a windbreak. Say you put the windbreak in and then year 5 or 6, a bad storm comes through and knocks 2 or 3 trees out. In order for the practice to function as it's designed, part of the maintenance would be to replace those trees. So that type of information would be included in this job sheet. Next slide. And so to help producers implement conservation practices and address resource concerns, we do provide cost assistance through our programs. I have a star next to Equip because it is a really good program for people who have not worked with us before on implementing conservation in their operation. It's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and it targets specific resource concerns with the implementation of conservation practices. So what this might look like is the example that I had earlier showing clearly the erosion happening on that field. We see that there's a resource concern there. We're going through and looking at what sorts of practices might work to address that, and then we're selecting 1 or 2 of those, creating a conservation plan, and then providing some cost assistance for that. CSP is another great program, the Conservation Stewardship Program. It is a little bit more detailed though, and it's meant to assist producers in building on existing conservation efforts, so further improving operation sustainability. An example of this would be like if you were doing reduced tillage on your operation and you wanted to further improve and do like a cover crop on top of that, or no-till, something like that. And it's not just a quick contract where we come in and do fix a resource concern and then you're through the contract. It's a 5-year contract and you're expected to maintain and improve conservation throughout that. It is a good program, and there are many other programs that we also can help you may be able to get assistance through. And I would recommend reaching out to your local field office to figure out, what your goals, what program would best fit what you need at this point. I also just want to touch on the timeline of our programs. Depending on when you sign up and depending on what our funding looks like, the timeline could be anywhere from a couple months to you could be waiting a year or 2 to receive financial assistance. It really just depends on the situation. So I also want to emphasize too that, or come back and say that all of the technical assistance that I've talked to you about up until this point is available without going into a program. I know that financial assistance is really important to a lot of operations to implement these conservation practices. But if the need to be, if the timeline is more important, you can still work through us. We can still write you a conservation plan and you can do it on your own. So with that, next slide. And if you are interested in working with us or have questions, I would say your next step would be reaching out to your local service center. And you can do that by going to this link, which I think we'll be throwing in the chat. It should bring you to the, the general office page and have the team lead's contact information on there. That might be the person you're working with, or they might connect you with someone like me who is a soil conservationist in the office, more of a planner role. So that is a good starting point. And the types of things you should be thinking about when you are thinking about calling us are, what kind of help are you looking to get? What are your short and long-term goals? And then just explaining what your operation is, just so that if and when we do a site visit, we can be better prepared to answer your questions. Next slide. And then last, if you need help getting connected or you just really want to reach out to one of us, the Minnesota WIC NRCS contacts, that is totally fine. I am in the Northeast area. Taylor is in the Southeast area. Chantel's in the Southwest, and Kate is in the Northwest. You may or may not be working with us. We like the way our systems works is we like to connect people who, say you're in North St. Louis, we would like to connect you with someone in the Virginia field office because the people working in that office better know the resource concerns up there and can better assist you. Although we, of course, are happy to answer questions and connect you with whatever resources you might need. So with that, that's kind of the end of my presentation. I am looking forward to answering questions later. But thank you again.
Thank you so much, Claudia. That was wonderful. And we will have questions after Wendy Johnson presents. And so our goal was to have Claudia introduce everyone to NRCS programs and practices, and then have a landowner who has actually been engaged in NRCS conservation to speak to that. And so I want to take a moment to introduce Wendy Johnson from Hay Creek Hills Farm. She splits her time between working at the local library and restoring a long since abandoned farm just outside of Red Wing, Minnesota. Storytelling arts, including writing and filmmaking, are her creative passions, as well as horticulture and prairie restoration. She's raised in Minnetonka as one of 5 siblings and grew up camping, paddling, fishing, and hiking with her family across Minnesota, the Great Plains, and the Rocky Mountains. Sounds spectacular, Wendy. And her long-term goal is to restore her 100 acres to its greatest potential, providing rich native habitat to attract and sustain an abundance of plant and animal species. Wendy, welcome, and thank you for this contribution.
Thank you, Burke. Okay, welcome everyone. I am going to give you first a description of the farm and land, and then I'll share with you motivation for why I'm active in this restoration, and then some specifics of my experience with CRP, CREP, and EQIP. So Hay Creek's Hill Farm, as Burke mentioned, it was an abandoned homestead, and it's located on the top of bluff and includes prairie, oak savanna, and hardwood forest originally. It was at high risk for, and still is for, erosion. So it was enrolled in the CRP program in 1985 when CRP first started. Please advance the slide. Okay, and so it is in the Minnesota driftless region, and this area is characteristic. This is a view of just south of Red Wing, looking at the bluffs and Lake Pepin in the background there. The unique characteristic of this area is that all of the bluff high top areas, if I look back on like a 1938 aerial, it was heavily cultivated in many portions that really should not have been, and not for long term. So advance, please. Next slide. So as I said, 100 rolling acres of bluff top and ravines. Right now, it's 60 acres of former cropland, so like corn and beans, 40 acres of forest, and it's surrounded on 3 sides by a state forest, which is super unique. And I've been a landowner for 9 years, 5 years on my own. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little historical perspective, And this is a fascinating map that you can find online. I should have had it's from the Minnesota Remaining Native Prairie, a century after the Public Land Survey. Fascinating visual of what the land was surveyed at, more than 100 years ago and what remains today. So in the land survey, pretty much it was described as prairie, brush prairie, oak openings and barrens and aspen oakland. That's in Goodhue County where I reside. And it was fascinating to go back and look at original survey documents. And sure enough, barrens, oak barrens is what the surveyor had written. And I can just imagine how wild it was. Then in 87 through 2017 was a massive Minnesota biological survey for the whole state. Now the majority is covered in cropland. But if on the picture of Goodhue County there, the little tiny red spots are remaining native prairie. And for the whole state of Minnesota, you'll see that. And primarily in my region, it is these dry, high bluff tops that we see, nicknamed goat prairies because they are so steep, you couldn't cultivate it, you couldn't even graze it because the cattle couldn't manage the incline, and really only goats can do that. Okay, so that's a description. Let's go to what motivated me. Next slide, please. So I had a sister-in-law basically say to someone else, why is Wendy doing this? Okay, why am I restoring prairie or reconstructing and restoring prairie? Well, I love this quote from a Cherokee elder, and it goes like this. The Western settler mindset was, I have rights. The mindset of Indigenous people is, I have obligations. And these obligations, I feel so strongly to my natural environment, and in particular to this land. The land to me is a gift. And in my case, my land is literally a gift that I received from my late partner, Jim Tittle, pictured here. He, through what is typical, he had inherited the land from his father, who had purchased it in 1969. But when Jim passed away, the land was deeded to me as the sole owner. And I learned a lot from Jim about very basic things and appreciating the land. But the learning curve since 2020 when he passed away and since 2022 when I renegotiated my contract, my CRP contract, has been steep but exciting. So I think of, why I'm a steward for the land. I hate saying it's my property. It's our land and I am the caregiver for now. And a lot of people would say, well, that's such a burden. And it is a burden if you think of it in a negative way. You have to pay taxes, you have to upkeep. In a restoration project, it's a constant, okay, how many of you like to garden out there? What is your main activity? Pulling weeds, right? Well, in this case, it's pulling weeds and cutting down trees, basically. But it is really a calling for me, and it's my happy place. And if I could, I have a little bunkhouse on the very far field that is the home of my happy place, I guess, but I would spend, if I could, I would live out there all the time. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's a good illustration of recent aerial of exactly what do I have on the land here. So it was everything. So you see a farm, basically a cultivated area surrounded by wooded forest. Everything in yellow is my CREP, that's conservation and, I'm sorry. Now I'm doing a blank here, but it's the enhancement program, CRP, that's enhanced. And that is a permanent pollinator habitat that is almost 18 acres. It's the highland of the bluff area for the kind of the best possible outcome. And that was just drill seeded last year in June 24. The remaining acres around it that you still see are green is the regular CRP. And that was planted in, wait for it, smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass in 1985 to prevent erosion, because gosh darn it, the highway department used those and it really works. But it is so good that it really has remained a monoculture for much of the land. And it's taken Mother Nature, after 40 years, it's taken a long time for most of the areas to naturalize, if at all. So then finally on the little area on the lower left is the latest project, and that is taking advantage of an EQIP application now. Claudia said that EQIP, well, my application has been approved and it just has to be signed, and I've been assured that it's going to go through. We'll see. But the nature of the program is, for my qualifying for this EQIP funds or cost sharing, is because it's a wildlife habitat management or improvement, as well as a timber improvement. So in the illustration there's a little brown oval. That's the existing native remnant prairie, and it is a super steep goat prairie. And the area around it is going to be expanded by at least maybe 8 to 10 times. And then as we get on top of the bluff where there was oak savanna that's been totally just socked in with buckthorn, mostly buckthorn, that's going to be improved. One thing I really recommend, if you are considering any conservation or restoration type work, is to look at your 1938 aerial survey maps and get a feel for what the land looked like before it got socked in with all these invasive species, and like buckthorn that came in my county around the 1990s. That was what we used to determine kind of what the natural area would have been for the remnant prairie there. Next slide, please. Okay, just to give you an idea of, we've looked at maps and all that, so what does it really look like on the ground? This is a really nice, kind of, to me, interesting comparison of what the difference is between a reconstruction and a restoration. Generally, people tend to say restoration, but I like to delineate between the two. A reconstruction is just that. You are rebuilding a prairie, most often from previously from ag land that's been abandoned. And then a restoration is a native prairie that you are trying to open up and let it breathe life into it and let it expand kind of on its own, given better conditions. So the top row there is my the CREP, the enhanced, which is the permanent pollinator habitat with some real typical species. This is, by the way, the first year of planting. And I did have some things actually bloom here and there, but we've got some grasses, variety of grasses there in the first one, a partridge pea, which is an annual, and the second one, you see a lot of that in the first year. And then we've got anise hyssop. I had a seed sowing party and invited pretty much anyone to come out and help sow seeds by hand after it was drill seeded. And the idea being to have dense swaths of single species, because when pollinators are going from, they're specialists, many of them. So if they're especially fond of anise hyssop, they can find many plants together instead of spending more energy hopping from 50 feet to 50 feet to 50 feet. Because when you drill seed for a prairie reconstruction, the seed is all mixed up. So you get kind of an even distribution, and I'm guessing that it takes decades for it to kind of sort itself out in the fields for what thrives in different areas and multiplies. And then we've got a St. John's wort on the last one. On the bottom now, and the permanent pollinator habitat was 75 species. I had a friend who was a professional who very graciously wouldn't allow me to pay him. And he made the plan for me. It includes 75 or 65 forbs and shrubs, a shrub being like roses and lead plant, and then 10 species of grasses and sedges. The typical kind of generic plan that you might get that's actually much more affordable but is much more restricted is 4 grasses and 23 forbs. But you don't have to go by like the typical prescribed, this is what you can do. You can get more diverse. And I encourage you, if you do something like this, to figure out what your budget is and plant to the diversity that your budget will allow, because in the long run, that will make a huge difference in the long run viability of that prairie, as well as attracting various species. So the bottom 4 pictures there are from my native prairie, the goat prairie on the bluff. And I don't know how many species are there. That is one of my projects to find out. And this April, I'm having 2 DNR botanists as well as 2 zoologists come, and they're going to do a survey on the goat prairie and and the forested area. And I'm really excited to learn from them about what we have there. But the first one is a pale spike lobelia. The second one is a narrow leaf puccoon, which is one of my favorites. We've got a really cool milkweed called the green comet milkweed. And then on the right is a woodland lily, and it's just a single lily that pops up and then disappears. Another year I saw it in bloom, but it was bitten off all around the edges where a deer had bitten it in the bud. But apparently woodland lilies are a food source for deer. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in the process of this restoration for the native, let's see, let me start over. So for each program, I've participated or am participating in 3 programs. It's the CRP, CREP, and EQIP. So the CRP started with just the 1985 old school prevent erosion. That I'm actually kind of, my long-term plan is to fight that and get it closer restored to something that's more diverse. The CREP 2023 permanent pollinator habitat has about a 70 to 30 ratio of grasses to forbs. For a native, for a at least what I've been told, and Claudia could probably answer this, but if you're shooting for, people think that a reconstruction is mimicking a natural habitat. It is not. It would take hundreds, thousands of years to do that, but it has different functions, and permanent pollinator habitat is heavy on the forbs. So that's why it's a 30% forbs. But if it were a prairie, more of a grasses, a mix, it would be lower in the forbs. And then EQIP then is a wildlife habitat improvement. I've got that high dry remnant prairie, and that's been there for thousands of years, and a oak savanna restoration. And so I had my soil conservationist, who is not pictured here, John Benjamin from Goodhue County. He's the one who was handling the project. And then Jared Holm, who's pictured, he's the forester that I've been working with. And he, consults with NRCS, works tightly with them. And he is the one who is actually creating my plan and designating the geographic area and what the practices will be and the timeline. And this is about a 4 to 5 year plan. And then Karen Jokala, who's one of our members, actually, she is a pollinator conservation specialist with Xerxes Society, and she's particularly expert in the species that are involved in this particular restoration project. So we brought her in to consult, to give some advice and kind of second opinion about how and where maybe to use chemicals and not to use chemicals, and what we have there. So super excited. I love this team. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with a little fun video, a very short story, Planting a Prairie, and I'll just narrate over it. Go for it. Okay, so Planting a Prairie, a very short story by Wendy Johnson. All right, so begin with a field of invasives. Then you give your field a close shave of a mow, and it looks really good. Now let those plants grow. Then you spray them all to kill them, and then you burn it all to open it up. Then comes the drill seed. Finally, and it's looking pretty good. The cover crop comes up first. In this case, it is oats, and they are thriving. But we got to mow it before it goes to seed. And wait a minute, only 6 rows? What the heck? Oh yeah, the tractor's clutch broke, so I had to leave the mower. And in the meantime, all the oats are killed by crown rust. All that's left are straws. Oh, and then the invasive grasses take over huge parts. Finally, after 5 weeks, the tractor is fixed. I get to mow the field. Now I'm in suspense for spring. Next slide, please. So bottom line is, if you are going to restore a prairie, it takes patience, and you don't know what's going to happen, just like for any of you or all of us who are engaged in any kind of farming, weather, whatever. Each site, each practice, the conditions for that year are all different, and you can't necessarily predict what's going to happen. But I'm excited about it, and I just want to put a little plug out. I am having a MNWiC Field Day. We're having it July 27th, and if you can't make it July 27th, I'm having a 3rd annual farm tour on July 19th, and that'll be just outside of Red Wing, Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome, Wendy, really awesome. It looks like we already have some questions in play here. I can't see everyone, but I really can't see people raising their hands. Noreen, can you?
Yeah. In fact, we have some questions that rolled in. Claudia, this one is for you and your camp. If I just want technical assistance, is there a charge for that? And how do I do that? Do I have to apply to the Farm Service Agency first to get technical assistance?
No, you do not need to. Well, first I'll say there's no fee. We are funded with taxpayer dollars, and so that's how we are funded. So you can call us. Like I said, sometimes assistance can be as simple as someone just calling us, asking for just some quick advice, and that is as far as it goes. We can come out to your site, suggest options and practices, and even do the conservation plan without, you don't need what's the word I'm looking for? You don't need an account with FSA. You don't need any of that. We can just provide that as technical assistance. So.
Okay. Another question rolled in, Claudia, for you is, if I'm not a farmer and I have a cabin near a river or lake, can I get assistance from NRCS?
We work with people who are not traditional agricultural producers. By traditional, I mean large scale farmers. Often, a lot of the projects that I work up here, it's about forest management, and so that is something that can be covered under EQIP. I would encourage you to reach out to your NRCS office. I believe you should be covered, but I would say working with them is going to be the best place to start. So.
Thank you, Claudia. Wendy, question for you. There was a lot of conversation in the chat. There was zoologists, what was that, all the technical expertise? Did they charge? Were they from DNR? Can you give us a little bit update on that?
Yeah, so once you are connected into NRCS, you're part of a community, and you can, make as much of that as you'd like. And right now, I don't even remember how I got connected with the botanists, because it was a year ago, and it might have been through my forester. But it might have been when he said, I know this person who would really like to, who does this, who surveys remnant prairies and would really like to see, your land. And so I contacted, I think I must have gotten her email or something, and I contacted her. So that's how that came about. And then another connection I had was, I had a graduate student from the University of Minnesota come out to look at my wild blackberries, because he's doing genetic research for future cultivation of them as like apples. And I responded to a request I saw from him, asking landowners if they'd be willing to let him, see their blackberries, on an organization that I belong to called the Prairie Enthusiasts. So once you really, get into it, I think, you can make as many connections as you want to. And people are just very happy to share.
Thank you. And Burke, can you kind of cover a little bit? I mean, is there a charge to go to Wendy's field day? And I like to eat. Are you going to have food?
Yeah, no,
Uh,
there's no charge for the field day. And Wendy and Maddie, who is the regional coordinator for this region, and I can talk about that, but there's
Yeah.
always food and refreshments. I guess I would ask if there's parking concerns, but people should go to our website if they want to RSVP for this Sunday, July 7th field day. Wendy, is there a parking concern or?
I was actually hoping that we could park at my house in Red Wing and then carpool.
Okay.
Um, and there isn't a parking concern per se, but it would kind of depend on how many people come.
Yeah, well,
Um,
we'll get an idea from the RSVP. That's why it is so important to go to our website and do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But Norina, there's someone who's had their hand up and you may not see them because there's so many people on the screen, but Diane Erdman has her hand up. I don't know if Maddie, maybe you can unmute her if she means to have her hand up.
I don't mean to have my hand up. That's just my weird little thing.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay,
Hi,
okay.
Wendy.
All right, thank
You know,
you.
Also for Wendy and Claudia, do you have a place to buy pollinator seed, and where would you suggest, or where can I get supplies for that seed? Because it is quite expensive also.
Yeah. Let's see. There are several seed providers like Prairie Moon out of Winona, Shooting Star is another one, and all over the state you'll have some native prairie seed providers. And Claudia, I know, I think you guys have a list of maybe providers or.
Potentially, just as a federal agency, we are not supposed to be giving
Okay.
any sort of endorsement to any of these. Um, Anywhere you can buy seeds, but I mean, I think there are resources online too through the DNR that have native seed. That's what I would tell everyone to do as well. Sometimes the SWCD, NRCS and SWCD work together quite often. That's another thing that we would work with them on is why don't you check with your SWCD? They can provide that list. So
And you,
I think
you should be purchasing seed that is close to you geographically. There's, I don't know how many miles it is, but you want to have seed that's been grown within a proximity to your land.
Another question too is about the burning a little bit, Wendy, about the burning. Some people might be a little scared of that actually.
Yep. So prairie restoration, reconstruction, burning is one of the main ways to maintain the natural plants. They evolved with disruption, and the disruption being burning. Burning opens up it burns off the duff to provide light for the seedlings. It has nutrients, it's a nutrient type thing. And some plants thrive in burning while the ones you don't want will not thrive. But when in the case of burning, you can hire a prairie management company. You can also check with like Pheasants Forever, the prairie enthusiasts. There are groups that have highly trained volunteers that will do burns for a minimal cost. I belong to the Prairie Enthusiasts, which is a nonprofit, super excellent organization that's from Minnesota, Wisconsin, all the way down to Illinois and Iowa. And they conduct and train people for burns. So I've had a classroom training and I've also had one field training, and I hope to now I can participate in organized prescribed burns. For me, through the connections I've made now, the main thing is finding someone who will take on your project as what you call a burn boss. And those organizations have people who have that expertise, who can conduct a burn for you or with you. The liability comes that they are doing it on your behalf. The landowner signs the permit to take responsibility.
Thank you, Wendy. Claudia, can you please share with us, there's been a lot of conversation about federal funding. There was a question in there about federal funding. Can you kind of cover that a little bit for us, please?
Yes, there has been a lot of stuff happening around federal funding. I mean, with any administration change, there is going to be some changes. The funding, it is some of it is frozen right now. For some of it gets complicated very fast, but we pull from a bunch of different pools to fund our projects, pools of money. And one of them was the IRA. We got a bunch of money from the Inflation Reduction Act. And so any funding having to do with that, anyone who is funded under current guidance, anyone who is funded under it in previous years and already has a contract from previous years, we should be able to move forward with those payments and contracts. That should be okay. Anyone who was funded under it this year, funds are still frozen. So we are waiting to hear on that. As far as just general funding goes, I am hopeful that we will hear back about more concrete funding in the next couple months. Just knowing what that looks like for our programs in the future, so that I can provide, better technical advice or financial, or field those financial questions about how likely am I to get funded. I mean, you never know, but it's good when we have we have X amount of dollars to spend and whatever. So a lot of that is kind of up in the air. But I encourage people to keep moving forward, even if they do want financial assistance, because this spring was challenging with the IRA funds a little bit. But I'm really hopeful that it'll be worked out by next year when funding comes around for 2027 and further on projects like that. So every day we are learning something new. Yeah. So
can I add just a personal comment? So my EQIP application is all but signed, and I reached out to my soil conservationist, and he said, yes, it's still going. And then my forester called me personally that next Monday and said, Wendy, don't worry. But I had heard conflicting things, and there was a Reuters article, and I actually emailed a conversation with the reporter, and I learned that there are two different streams of funding, and so it depends on what your funding is, but that's all just right now. So whatever the case is, I say keep on going and just keep in touch with your NRCS folks. And if something doesn't happen this year, you will have had the connections made, the experience, and you can, be prepared. But I say just go for it.
Thank you very much for answering that. And another question came in from Alex, and she was saying that she doesn't really have a rototiller or way to work up the land for the pollinator habitat that she wants to put in. Is there a way for her to do that without the big machinery?
Whoops. I would say, don't rototill anything. So if you're doing a prairie planting, they love just being set on top after you've cleared it, after you've burned off all the residue. If you till, you will be inviting seeds that have been in the soil to germinate, and then you'll have a mess. Well, you'll always have a mess, but you'll have a bigger mess. So No problem. But let me know if you have questions. I can help you too, and I'm sure Claudia can too.
I'm just going to interject that we've reached 1 o'clock and we're certainly grateful if Wendy or Claudia can stay on for 10 more minutes. But before we lose everyone, I just want to thank you all for joining us and let you know that we will send this recording and the list of resources shared in the chat by Alex to anyone who's been in attendance, and that you would please join us again next month, March 26th, for our webinar on a pollinator habitat. And also go to the MNWiC website to be able to connect with any one of our regional coordinators, because part of our mission is to support women in ag and women on the land, women gardening, help move you towards the NRCS support system that exists. So if there are more questions, Wendy or Claudia, do you have a few more minutes? Okay, and Noreen, thank you for doing such a magnificent job stewarding those questions. Do we have other questions coming in? I haven't kept track of that. Noreen?
No, just the approval if we can take a picture of everyone, a screenshot. We'd like to see your beautiful faces, really.
That would be great. So are you able to do that, Chris? Yes, good, thank you.
If you're willing, just quick turn on your video and we'll, we have this set so that only people who, I think I have it set, only people who have their video on will be, yeah, we just want video participants.
Well, we had one question, I guess, from Lindsay.
Yes. Well, I don't see it, so, oh. You want to do that, Noreen, or no?
We can take questions while we do a
Yeah.
Lindsay, do you want to unmute, please, and ask your question?
All right, everybody smile and wave if you want to be in the.
Okay.
Nice. Okay.
Well, Lindsay's on an iPhone. It looks like maybe we should read this. It says, has NRCS programs ever worked on projects that involved conservation efforts in conjunction with sensitivity to archaeology sites?
Oh.
We're currently working on one in Illinois, DNR, and with Wisconsin DNR has some guidance on these as well. Has anyone encountered this? And I have some projects that I'll be looking into in the coming year. Thank you, Lindsay. Oh, there you are. Hi, Lindsay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. That was first directed to you, Claudia. So
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yep.
it was just kind of directed. Yeah, exactly. Directed to the NRCS specifically.
Yeah, I have only been with NRCS 2.5 years. I have not run into that myself. I'm sure it has happened, but I'm
Nope.
not sure. Yeah, what has come of it?
yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just generally curious. I have a few properties here in Minnesota, but this also applies to even the ones I have in Wisconsin and North Dakota. We have a mix of both woodland and farmland where we have acquired these lands that have oftentimes they're burial mounds and they require a lot of sensitivity. And oftentimes by the time the Conservancy gets them, they're very overgrown, they haven't been taken care of. And so it's a mix of both dealing with invasive species, large trees growing out the side of them, and then also sometimes erosion from just not having enough vegetation. So these are some of the projects that I have coming up that I'm potentially interested in, looking into NRCS grants to help us with.
Yeah, and I think it's worth reaching out to your local service center. I think
Okay.
that the biggest concern with cultural resources is disturbing
Yes.
the site. And so I don't know for sure, but from what you're describing, sounds like things that could potentially work because you're not, really disturbing the site. That being said, it is a very unique situation that you probably, if I was working on this in my state, I would work with the landowner and bring my state archaeologist in on it, you know, who, so that's how I would handle it. But I would absolutely say worth reaching out.
Lindsay, where are you? Where's your land?
Well, so I personally am living in Aiken. We have a property in Paynesville and we have a property in Welch. Those are the two that I'm interested. So Welch is actually not far from you, Wendy.
That's the Cannon River Valley.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the Welch site is one I just recently acquired, and it's a mix of both some of these bottomlands and a bluff. And I'm still working out on how I want to approach it, but I really liked listening to some of the things you had to say because I have not worked on restoring a bluff site. But then and that's where the archaeology is, and it's very sensitive, and I haven't had a chance to get my eyes on it specifically because of the snow. But then there's also this weird bottomland where there's just so much large overgrown trees and yeah, it just looks like a mess, and it's right on Canyon Valley Trail as well.
Right.
So, yeah, it just doesn't look great.
Yeah.
There was also information. Katie Evans, could you unmute, please? She wanted to share. She had some information that could be of helpful to you, Lindsay.
Okay, great.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Claudia's colleague. I'm just located north of the Twin Cities, and with any of the projects that we either help with the technical assistance or if you're applying for a program, we do environmental reviews for those practices and then also cultural resources reviews to identify if the practice that we're proposing and that would work with the operation, if there would be any risk as having a negative effect on cultural resource areas. We do involve our state archaeologists, and they do a further review just to make sure that they look at Minnesota Historical Society information and others to see if there's anything in our project area or adjacent to that we need to be aware of. And if it does come up, you know, they'll do an on-site review also and do field surveys to make sure that we know what we're looking at.
So it could be very beneficial for me since I already have those relationships to just at some point in time before I really get down this road, it's just invite them out to the site directly, maybe even do it at the same time that I have an NRCS person and we can all talk.
I think that would be great because then if there is some known items that would help shape what our conservation plan looks like and what we can really then assist with. Opportunity for a lot of our new staff to come out there and see sites like that because we don't run across them often, but when we do, we want to make sure that we're looking at them the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what my whole job is really.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the
preserving these
question, Lindsay. Thank you, Katie, for stepping in. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Wendy. Want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's almost 1:10. And this has been wonderful and enriching and enlightening. We're very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you to my team.
Yep. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.